Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Happiness Explorer podcast. I'm Mike Duffy, and I'm joined by our guest today, David Greiner. I'm delighted to have David aboard. He and I have known each other going on a couple years. I think he's got some fantastic perspectives to share about happiness, about his business career and his journey. And I'm really excited to have you aboard today. Welcome, David.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
All right. By way of introduction, David's 37. He's from Ann Arbor, Michigan, also spends time in Florida. He's a real estate investor, and he has an interest in romantic relationships and how to help society in that regard, which we'll dig into. He is single and dating, and what he's most into is romantic relationships and how to get society back on track with improving the outcomes of our culture around romance. And he's also the proud dad of three very large, very fluffy dogs. So those are his constant companions. So Dave and I had a chance to talk about really what drives his happiness and what works for him and may work for you. And the first thing we want to dig into is the power of faith and how David's strong faith exploring the gospel, involvement in prayer, learning from fellow believers, and being in fellowship with fellow believers, how that really colors his worldview and guides so much of his life. So I'd love to hear about how faith works for you in driving happiness.
Yeah, appreciate it, Mike. So my faith journey has been, like a lot of people, kind of a bumpy road. I think it has been a result of things happening to me, maybe in some ways things happening for me, adversity that has forced me to understand that there is something greater than myself out there, and that my pursuit of glory was ultimately a fruitless pursuit, and that I have found myself much more in my pursuit of the Lord and in my pursuit of glorifying Him and adjusting my lifestyle to conform to His Son's image versus that of the world. As a result, my lifestyle has become radically different. And I have, in many ways, become a different person. In some ways, become the person that I think I was always supposed to be. And I wish things had been smoother in a lot of respects. And I think a lot of people on the faith journey would describe it like that. But ultimately, it's been a wonderful path that I would not change in the slightest.
I'd love to hear more about that. I particularly heard adjusting your lifestyle to live really as Jesus would, or strongly influenced by Jesus. And I think whether you have strong religious faith or not, it's hard to go wrong with following the teachings of Jesus Christ. Just as a wisdom leader, not as a religious figure, just extraordinary. And obviously, if you have strong faith from a religious perspective, it just orders of magnitude more powerful. But I think anyone can learn and benefit from what did Jesus teach, and how does that guide how you live? And that would be, I'd love to hear about that in a practical way. How does emulating Jesus guide you?
Yeah, so for me, I always wanted to control the outcome. I wanted the results. I wanted to prove myself to be good enough. And what I missed was that I was always good enough, and all of us are. All of us are made in God's image, but we live in a very results-driven culture. We are very driven towards things like money, status, reputation, and these things are in some ways a benefit, but in other ways have the potential to compromise our integrity. And while I achieved a number of these things pretty early on, I was ultimately glorifying myself as opposed to the Lord. I was not trusting in the Lord's plan. I was trusting in my own plan. And as wonderful and purposeful and intentful as it was my plan. And it was flawed and it was misguided. I think when I look to the gospel and the teachings of Jesus, you come to his two laws, which are to love the Lord with all your heart, which was one that was difficult for me because the way things worked out sometimes were hard and time had to swallow some difficult pills. But the beauty in the adversity gave me the education and insight that I needed to become the man that I was supposed to be. The second commandment being to love your neighbor as yourself. And I have struggled with this. I have viewed, I think since an early age, I've had a difficult time respecting others, and as a result, have had a difficult time in loving my neighbor. I understood as a child in middle school, high school, how broken our culture really is. As an adult, it became more apparent to me. The adults were, in many ways, children that had just been on the planet a little bit longer. And that was a difficult pill for me to swallow when that really hit home. And as a result, I had a lack of respect for the adults around me. That made it really hard for me to love my neighbor. But ultimately, what I came to was the greatest thing that contributed to my salvation is my own sin. And when I realized that, I wasn't able to judge my neighbors the same way that I was before because I didn't have any leg to stand on.
Mm.
So I was able to forgive those around me. I was able to forgive myself, and I was able to feel peace.
How did that come about? How did you reach that epiphany? Do you remember?
It was hitting rock bottom. It was having issues with sobriety. It was having health problems that were keeping me in my bed consistently for a year straight. I didn't know if I was ever going to be able to live a normal life again. And everything that I had built, I realized was insufficient in getting what was my primary objective, which was to find my wife. And when I could see that everything that I had worked for was fruitless, my pride was destroyed. And that hurt a lot, but it freed me because I didn't care anymore. I could let it go.
Mm.
I could submit myself.
Mm.
And then I was alive.
The key to life, it isn't money. It's happiness. And when you measure how happy you are, you actually become even more happy. Our friends at Gobundance, the Tribe of Millionaires, use a very specific tool to measure their happiness. It's called the Life Happiness Index. And you can have it too. Go over to Gobundance.com/LHI and take your Life Happiness Index assessment. You'll rate yourself in multiple categories on exactly how happy you are and get a custom output for you specifically that you can use in developing whatever goals you have for your life. Gobundance is the tribe of healthy, wealthy, generous people who choose to live epic lives. And the tool Gobundance members use at the base of all of that is the Life Happiness Index. Get out there and grab life big.
None of us enjoy suffering. We don't ask to suffer. But as the Buddha famously said, life is suffering. Suffering happens to us. For some people, and all of us at certain times of our life, the suffering really hits deep. And the opportunity is to find the gifts in suffering. And that's a great example of being bedbound, being addicted, seeing your life plan just fall apart, hitting bottom, reaching for a higher power, and really changing your worldview in a profound way towards benevolence, towards, how to view others more compassionately. That is a profound story of suffering and the gifts of suffering. So for those that are going through suffering, and my personal story, when I hit bottom now, and I hit a variety of bottoms, I still do. And yet now I know that there are gifts there. I know that if I can suffer the right way, which to me means getting support, getting it off my chest, not suffering alone, and then doing the work, asking, what is the gift here? What can I learn here? What can I lean into here? That every single time with the right ingredients, those bottoms have leveled me up. And it sounds like this, was just an example of how you've discovered really the same thing.
It has very little to do with what we accomplish or our experiences or how much we enjoy something, the pleasure that we get from it. It's about who we become.
Mm.
And the challenge is that in order to become the best of ourselves, that requires pain. And we don't like pain, and understandably so. But that doesn't mean that we should turn away from it, that we should resist it, that we need to feel shame about it, that maybe it's an opportunity.
Absolutely. And shame is so corrosive and so powerful. And one of the things that can keep us tethered to the bottom is living in shame. And I've experienced that. And a way through shame is to talk with people that have followed a similar path and find out that you're not alone. That in some ways we are special snowflakes. I happen to believe that we all have intrinsic gifts, God-given or intrinsic, that make us truly unique and special. But in a lot of very powerful ways, and 12 steps really teaches that you are not special at all in your suffering and in the path through. And when we can get our suffering off our chest to someone who can relate, who's been there, that's, to me, has been such a powerful way of getting through shame and realizing I'm not unique, I'm not alone, anticipating the shame. Really hard to move forward when you're sitting in shame. And I just want to continue on this theme of adversity and determination. So you've had, you just mentioned one story, and you've got multiple stories of how you've overcome, how you've exerted grit and resilience and determination to navigate adversity. And I'd love to hear more of that story. What's some of the adversity you faced, and what has it done for you?
Sure. So I guess it all started in high school when I got really into the poker world, and everyone was at the time. And I put a lot of work into it, spent probably too many hours in school thinking about poker hands and playing them out in my head, and becoming a very, very good player, and a very successful player. And then at the age of 21, I purchased my first home with no idea what I was doing other than having an understanding that real estate was on sale, and it went well. And I bought a couple of homes, and I realized very quickly that the numbers made sense for me to repeat this process as much as I possibly could. And I made it my mission to buy as many properties as I possibly could in the shortest amount of time, as I felt it was a once in a generation opportunity. The problem is I didn't know what I was doing. And I was going to bank after bank after bank trying to get money. I was trying to learn about construction. I was trying to learn about property management. My vision was on point, which was acquire as much real estate as you can. And so, despite setbacks, I did. And I had 19 homes by the time I was 26 years old, and was a millionaire, was on top of the world, or so I thought. I realized that at that point, I could take things even further. So I got my real estate license. I opened a small brokerage. I purchased a construction company, and continued my desire to buy every single property that came across my path, and did so with less success. I had a construction company that fell apart pretty early on. The operator that I purchased the company from was a less trustworthy man. And I spent a number of years trying to turn the construction company profitable. I did, but it took a toll on me. I watched people steal from me, fights, people die. It was a lot for a young guy to handle, and the stress took its toll on me. My body was wearing down. I began using substances in a way that was pretty unhealthy. After a couple of years, the construction company stabilized. I continued to buy and had some success all the way until 2020, when I watched a city that is dependent on the student enrollment be turned upside down with a virus that was out of my control and could potentially bankrupt me in the event there was not a resolution within a couple of years. I had students that were not going to pay rent, that were unable to do so without the help of student loans, which would not be given if classes were not in person. My other properties, being student rentals, or excuse me, short-term rentals, were vacant because no one wanted to travel, and justifiably so. I was in a very stable position with 21 homes and a sizable net worth, and I had to stare at the possibility that if things went sour, I might not have a financial future, and the safety blanket that I built for my future family was at risk. I watched my dad have a heart attack. I couldn't get workers to come back to employment. I had my dad, my mom, and myself cleaning up trash from students, making repairs on homes, struggling just to get by. My bank was bought in the start of 2020. The owner of the bank, who was like a father to me, was originally going to stay on but was fired. My line of credit for $700,000 was called, and I felt totally hopeless, and it was really difficult. I also had a relationship around that time where I saw a future marriage fall apart, and I had fallen in love for the first time since I was in high school, and watching that fall apart really broke me because I realized that I wasn't ready to lead a family. I had not become the man that I wanted to become, and it killed me. It killed me.
So you had a perfect storm. You did all the right things in your business and got hit with COVID. And in the student housing business, I think we can all understand what a threat that would be. You got a very important romantic relationship end, serious illness of your father. I could see how all these things came together. And you said that you felt hopeless. What was it like there then? What did it feel like? What was it a typical day like at that bottom when you were dealing with all that stuff?
Yeah, I had no sense of self-worth. I had no sense of hope. I was looking at a problem that I didn't know how to solve,
Mm.
and I couldn't work my way out of it. I couldn't make money to solve things. I was trying to become a man that I didn't know how to become. And that was a problem that was not a simple one to solve.
Did you have much support then?
I did, but not as much as I would have liked. I had a few close friends that were by my side. A lot of my friendships over the years, I moved away from people sometimes for normal circumstances, like people are moving for jobs, people are having families, they're having kids, they've got stuff going on. A lot of it was realizing that I was growing apart from people, and I had my immediate family that was there for me but was struggling in their own right. My dad was on an ongoing basis was taken to the hospital in an emergency vehicle because he collapsed and had 4 or 5 surgeries within a 15-month period. My mom was doing the best that she could to care for him. And at the same time, my immune system was breaking down.
Mm.
I had chosen to neglect a autoimmune condition that was passed on to me by my mother to my sister and I. And despite my best attempts to live on the American diet with a lack of consideration for healthcare, my body was breaking down. I couldn't handle stress. I was chronically sick, and I spent roughly a year out of bed and wondering if I was ever going to be able to live a normal life again.
Mm. And then what happened?
A number of things happened. I had some people come into my life who grabbed me and picked me up and would not let me fall.
Mm.
And these were friends, these were new acquaintances, and I met some of the most remarkable people, and they showed me how to live. They taught me to believe in myself. They taught me to submit to the Lord. They gave me a home in Him. They showed me what that really meant, what it actually means to be a Christian.
Mm. Very cool. As I mentioned, to me, the recipe for coming out of trials or a bottom is support and doing the work. And you got that support from friends and old and new that believed in you, that wouldn't let you down, wouldn't let you fall, I think you said. And then you found the work in faith and deepening your faith. So I think it's a great example. I'd like to go more into friends and family and relationships. And you mentioned some of your friends, normal life circumstances, we drift apart. But in our conversation beforehand, it also sounds like there were some friendships you had to walk away from that weren't serving you anymore. And that can be a very common theme, particularly for high achievers, of what do we do? How do we cultivate the right sort of friendships? And what do we do about the friendships that have run their course that aren't serving us? And that could be difficult to navigate. So I'd love to hear more about leaving friendships and forming friendships. What's worked for you in as a recipe for happiness?
You become the product of your 5 closest friends. And I think the quote from Thoreau really is valid, where most men are living quiet lives of desperation.
Mm.
A lot of what people are in their 20s is who they are in their 30s, is who they are in their 40s. And we can do that now more than ever in a time of convenience and amenities galore. We aren't forced to really change and to grow because we don't need to. And I was watching the same mistakes being made over and over and over again. And finally, it hit me. This is never going to change. This is destructive. You can't be around this. You can't be a part of this. You need to either be alone or find people that you can be around. And I had a choice, which was be alone or be with your friends. And I think that there are more periods in my life that I was afraid of being alone, that I chose to be around people. And in retrospect, the better solution was to have been alone.
Mm.
So I chose that in the immediate, and I had some amazing people brought into my life by the grace of God that I've become really close with.
And one of the things I look for in friendships that I think is so critical is values alignment. Do we have similar values? I find growth mindset to be incredibly important. And you mentioned people that stayed the same in their 20s, 30s, 40s. That's a fixed mindset. It's a fixed life. And so I think that's an example of a value discriminator on a friendship. And as you think about the friendships that you stepped away from and those you stepped towards, how did values play a role?
Values were everything. So I didn't care I didn't care the age, I didn't care the interests, I didn't care what they did, acted, how they showed up. I cared about their values.
Mm.
And that was how it started.
Yeah. And I think it's a helpful lens when you're struggling with a friendship and you can't put your finger on why. Being able to look at the values that are really important to you and ask, are those shared values? It is a really helpful exercise. It's also a helpful exercise when we're looking for new friends and determining what's important to me and is this important to other people. So I think values is also always a helpful starting point. What are some of the other things you do to cultivate friendships that are healthy, that help you to thrive? What comes to mind for you?
I think a lot of it is authenticity and vulnerability. And we as men have a kind of mixed approach to this, where we either are told not to have emotions or we are told to more or less fall into our feminine. And emotionally vomit is a term that I've heard that I think is a good term. We're either told to not have emotions or to be overly emotional. Neither one of them is right. They both work against us. But going into a relationship with another man and letting your guard down and exploring who you are and showing vulnerability and taking ownership, holding yourself accountable, holding the other person accountable is a recipe for men at becoming their best.
I don't think we can underscore enough the importance of vulnerability and authenticity, and they're linked. We can't truly be authentic unless we're willing to take the mask off and show who we really are. And that can be scary. It certainly was scary throughout the majority of my life to be vulnerable. Because if I took the mask off and I showed you who I was, then maybe you'd feel the same way I felt about myself, which was less than, which was not worthy. And I spent a lot of my life as an Army officer, as a corporate leader, wearing a mask and afraid of vulnerability, afraid of authenticity. And similar to your story, it was suffering that caused me to have to bust through that, where I reached a point where I tried everything else and I simply had to connect with people at a different level. I was coming out of a long-term marriage. I was living in shame. I was suicidal. And one thing that I just had not tried yet was really telling people what I was experiencing and having the courage to just put it out there and finding safe people, people that would hold the non-judgmental and supportive space. Turns out a lot of people can do that. And that seems like a risk I hear often. I'm going to get burned if I'm vulnerable, if I'm authentic. And I keep taking shots at it, and I keep finding that I don't. There's a percentage of people that are not healthy psychologically. You typically know who they are in your life. And those people, the people that are pathological, they're not good candidates. But my experience has been the vast majority of people are. And when we get to a level of vulnerability, conversations like, I'm really scared, I'm in fear, I'm really hurting, it just changes the temperature of the conversation. And people naturally align and support. It's a beautiful part of human nature. And to me, I never activated it enough. I never brought it into my life. And I was the rate limiting step because I didn't have the courage to be vulnerable and authentic. And I'm still learning. I'm still taking reps at it. And each time I'm experimenting, saying, is the bottom going to drop out? Is something bad going to happen? You know, those programs are really strong. They've been around for a really long time. But I've learned it's more important to move towards this muscle of authenticity and vulnerability. I think it's just so critical for our growth, for connection, and for self-love. You know, it's hard to love yourself if you're wearing a mask, if you're not truly authentic. For me, it didn't feel like I could love a mask. But when I started being able to unveil myself to people and find that I was loved and supported for the real me, that was crucial on the path to learning to love myself. So, where in terms of authenticity and vulnerability, what's that journey been like for you?
I think a key theme for me in recent years has been what Jung has called self-realization, which is easier said than done. And it's something that I think a lot of us think we have, and is something that we're always working towards. But I think I made a lot of progress in that area. I think understanding who you are, what you are, and then owning it gives you a lot of strength. And we have a very, very powerful unconscious. We have many, many layers to us. And these go back to when we were little children. Exploring them, understanding them, and then finally integrating them are some of the more powerful things you can do.
I agree, but also some of the more challenging things. You know, the Greek admonition of know thyself, yes, but how? How can we really know ourselves? It's so complex up in our minds. There's a roiling debate going on, at least in my mind. What's the role of other people in support and friendships and relationships and in helping you to know yourself? Has that been important to you?
I think the benefit of other people is that you need people that you can trust, that see through you to your core, that will tell you the difficult things, that will support you in coming to terms with those difficult things. And then on the other hand, will applaud you for your strengths
Yep,
and your gifts. Because so often our understanding or our perception of ourselves is flawed.
totally.
And it's getting the people in who you know, like, and trust, who can see through you.
Yep,
And you need that because without them, you're just in your mind. You're alone. And there's only so much you can do when you're alone.
couldn't agree more. I think it's for just speaking for myself, I cannot see myself clearly. And I depend upon the vantage point, the perspective of those that I allow to know me, which gets back to the courage to be seen. There was a recent study said the number one driver of satisfaction in relationships is being seen, being fully seen. And it's a two-way street. It's being that friend that can create that safe space so that it's safe to be yourself. And it's also on the part of the giver to have the courage to allow yourself to be seen, kind of like a trust fall in a corporate context where you fall into the arms of others and you trust. That sounds really corny, but I think that's so critical in our close friendships and close family relationships to trust fall, trust that I can be myself, trust that I can show my true self, and trust that I'm not going to hit the deck when I fall backwards. And as you said, they see you, they lift you up. You also said that they help you see the difficult things. And that can take courage to on the part of being the provider of that, to take a risk and say, here's something that's a blind spot. Here's something I'm concerned about for you. I had an old colleague, he would always preface saying, I'd like to give you the gift of feedback. And it sounded a little hackneyed, but he was totally authentically real about it. It is such a gift to be able to see someone clearly and have the courage to give that feedback to help someone calibrate. That's an amazing gift, but it's a gift that requires trust and appropriateness, obviously, but takes some courage to take that to make that leap and to help tell people some hard truths. But I that's the couple things you said I think are so important in that. We talked a little bit about your family prior to, and we mentioned attachment styles, and you mentioned you're anxious and avoidant, as am I. And attachment styles are getting a lot of attention these days. They're formed at a very early time in our lives in response to how we received care from our caregivers. And colors our relationships, particularly our romantic relationships throughout our lives. And just curious how that attachment style has been a challenge for you and what you've done about it.
Yeah, so it's tricky for me because I have a combination of a secure, anxious, and avoidant attachment. It has manifested itself differently at different points in my life. At this point in my life, I am mostly secure with smaller portions of anxious and avoidant. I would say there's always been a sizable part of me that has been secure. I've had parents who loved me and have never let me know otherwise. That has always worked in my favor and is something that has never not been a part of me. I think the anxious and avoidant sides, which I think at times in my life have been more apparent, were a result of my parents having a difficult relationship through the majority of life, particularly in childhood, where there was conflict, there was some concerns about are they going to stay together? There was some blood, sweat, and tears between the two of them, and that put me into more of a caregiver role. And while I played the role well, it left me with some vulnerabilities, which are a general feeling of not being safe and having to be the one in charge, having to be the one that is responsible and make sure everyone's feelings are cared for, make sure everyone's lives are cared for. It made things like people's feelings very important to me. And in some ways, that was a blessing because things like values are something that I care a lot about. There are weaknesses that come as a result of that, most notably self-righteousness and a general fear of my surroundings. And have been a hurdle that I've had to work through.
Yeah, I think early premature adulthood, being a caregiver to your folks can be deeply undermining and can affect us. How have you gotten perspective on these themes? How how have you worked with him and moved past him?
So I've done a lot of psychosomatic work where I go into the memories of me as a child and I meet with that little boy and I understand his feelings at the time. I understand his way of thinking. But as a 37-year-old adult male, I need to protect him. And as an adult, I felt like I was not protected. I felt like I was still that little boy that had to look after things.
Hmm.
And at some point, you need to grow up and overcome these things that happened. But it was the psychosomatic, it was meditation, it was breath work. But honestly, it was all of that is nothing compared to the spiritual
Mm,
and the being on my knees in prayer, being in the Word,
got it.
listening to sermons from some of the greatest theologians and ministers that have ever lived, listening to them over and over again, and understanding that I, like everyone else, is made in God's image, and I and everyone else is a man of sin and needs to repent of that sin. And I could have spent as much time, I could have spent years with the psychosomatic, but I think that there's a time and a place for that.
Got it. Got
The
it.
ultimate thing was the spiritual.
Yeah. I like that a lot. I think there's a couple levels we can play. There's tools of psychology, there's tools of the mind, and then there's tools of spirituality, tools of the heart. And they're not exclusive. It's an and statement. We can pursue both of them. And it sounds like I hear that in your story. Last thing I just want to touch on, and from the introduction, it's clear that you're really invested in understanding romantic relationships and helping to improve those in society, navigate that in your own life. What are you doing there? And what are you looking to contribute?
Sure. So I realized that the only thing that I ever wanted was to have a wife and kids. And yet, despite everything that I had worked for, I had not gotten that. I realized that there is a lot of things going on with the romantic scene in 2024 that are very dysfunctional. I've seen friends go through divorces. I've seen unhappy marriages. I've seen kids being born out of wedlock. I've seen less people getting married altogether. I've seen a lot of hookup culture. And I'm looking around at a broken world, realizing that all I've ever wanted was to just have a family, and realizing I needed to go on a journey where I became the best man that I could be, understanding everything I could about romance, reading the books, listening to the podcasts, and doing the research so that I could become the man that I needed to be and hopefully find a solution that helps others achieve romantic outcomes that are far different from the norms that we're seeing today.
And how are you going about that? What's next?
A lot of researching a lot of things. It's a lot of different, listening to a lot of different people. It's taking in all of the perspective. So people that I agree with, people I don't agree with, people that I agree with a little bit, but I want to understand where it's coming from so I can piece this all together. So it's listening to the red pill community. It's listening to the feminists. It's trying to understand, where do they agree, where do they disagree, where are they coming from, who are these people, where are they right, where are they wrong, and figuring out the truth.
I'm curious, from your research, sounds like you've gone really deep in this. What advice would you give folks listening? What do you think are some of the most important things they could be doing in their relationships or in pursuit of relationships?
I think the most powerful thing that people could be doing right now is overcoming lust. I
Hmm.
think that for men in particular, lust is something that we are introduced to at a very young age. And I think that it creates a lot of dysfunction within relationships because men and women are speaking two different languages when they have sex. And in a time of incredible accessibility, we're diluting the most sacred act that was given to us. And the outcomes are not good. The more people that people sleep together with before they're married, the less successful the marriage is.
That's what the data show.
It is.
You might, if you're listening to this, you could say, okay, lust, it's natural, it happens. What's dangerous about it, and what do you do about it?
Sure. So for men, sex it means a lot of things. But today it means dopamine and testosterone. It is, I feel good because I just accomplished this task. My day is now improved because of this. I was able to sleep with this person. I was able to masturbate to a woman on the computer screen who is very attractive, and I feel great. And that is not how men develop a healthy sex life. We develop a healthy sex life by slow-paced intimacy building, vasopressin, and oxytocin pair bonding. And when we have that, we can really connect with a person. Women, on the other hand, naturally produce estrogen and oxytocin when they're having sex, and they feel like they're falling in love through the act of sex. But when sex is casual, when sex is with multiple partners without much real connection, they're not getting what they think they're getting. So you have men and women accomplishing very different tasks who may enjoy things in the moment, but are speaking two very different languages. And as a result, when they actually find out that they're speaking a different language, there is no attraction there. There is no commitment there because there's no values there.
Back to values, back to something deeper. Lust is not a value. Well, I really appreciate you sharing your story and your insights with us today, David. You've navigated, some rough patches, had some suffering that has leveled you up, that you found ingredients that make you happier. As you said early on in the conversation, you wouldn't be the same man without it. So I hope that, today's podcast gives people that sense of hearing stories about navigating adversity and suffering and some of the ways through that have been proven to work for David and can work for others. So I appreciate it, David. Thanks so much for being on today.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
All right. Take care, everyone.